I remember sitting at the kitchen table that night, alone, with a plate of food in front of me that had already gone cold. The clock on the wall said 11:04 p.m. I had been watching that clock since 7. My phone was on the table next to my fork. No messages, no missed calls, just silence from the one person I had spent 31 years of my life loving, protecting, and working myself to the bone for. I am 62 years old. My name is Harold, and I am not a man who raises his voice. I never have been. My father taught me that a man who screams has already lost the argument. A man who stays quiet, he's the one you should be afraid of. So when the front door finally opened that night, when my wife Sandra walked in with her coat still on and her lipstick slightly smudged, and she looked at me sitting there in the kitchen, like I was nothing more than a piece of furniture she'd forgotten to throw away, I did not raise my voice. She smirked, and then she said something that I will never forget for the rest of my life. She said, "You know what happened today, Harold? I had a one-night stand with my boss, and honestly, I'd do it again." I looked at her. I picked up my fork, and I finished my meal in silence. She stood there waiting for me to explode, waiting for me to cry, waiting for me to beg or scream or fall apart. But I just chewed my food slowly and set down my fork when I was done. What Sandra did not know, what nobody in that house knew, was that by the time she walked through that door, I had already made every decision that needed to be made. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story didn't start that night. It started a long, long time ago. I grew up poor, not the kind of poor that people talk about at dinner parties to seem interesting. I mean the kind of poor where your mother cuts one apple into 6 pieces and calls it dessert. The kind of poor where you wear the same shoes to school for 2 years, and you learn to walk a certain way, so nobody hears the sole flapping loose underneath. My father worked at a steel mill. He came home every evening smelling like smoke and metal, and he would sit down at the dinner table without complaining. He ate whatever my mother cooked, said thank you, and then helped my younger sisters with their homework before going to bed. That was the example I grew up watching. That was the man I tried to be. I married Sandra when I was 29. She was 26, beautiful in a quiet way, with dark hair and a laugh that made the room feel warmer. We didn't have much. We rented a small apartment on the east side of the city. I was working as a warehouse supervisor. She was a receptionist at a dental office, but we were happy, or at least, I thought we were. We had one son together. His name is Marcus. He came along 2 years after we got married, and I tell you, the day he was born was the greatest day of my life. I held that little boy in my hands and I made him a promise, a quiet promise, the kind you make in your heart. I told him I would never let him go without. I would work. I would sacrifice. I would make sure his life was better than mine. And I kept that promise. Over the next 30 years, I worked my way up from warehouse supervisor to regional operations manager. It wasn't glamorous. I wasn't some big-shot executive, but I was steady. I was reliable. I put Marcus through college. I paid off our house. I made sure Sandra never had to worry about money. I thought that was enough. I was wrong. You don't notice a marriage falling apart all at once. It happens the way water slowly carves through stone. Slow, quiet, and by the time you see the damage, the shape of everything has already changed. Sandra had gone back to work full-time about 5 years ago, not because we needed the money, because she was bored, she said, because she wanted to feel useful. And I understood that. I supported it completely. She got a job as an executive assistant at a marketing firm downtown. Her boss was a man named Derek Calloway, 47 years old, divorced, the kind of man who wears suits that cost more than my first car. In the beginning, she never mentioned him much, but slowly, over the months, his name started appearing more and more in her conversations. Derek says the firm is expanding. Derek took the whole team out for lunch today. Derek thinks I should be handling more responsibility. I didn't say anything. I wasn't a jealous man by nature. I trusted my wife. We had 30 years together. 30 years of mornings and arguments, and making up and holding each other through things that would have broken other people. I trusted her completely, but then our son Marcus got married, and that's when everything in our family started to unravel in ways I never could have predicted. Marcus married a woman named Diane about 3 years ago. She was sharp, ambitious, and beautiful in an aggressive sort of way. Kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately starts calculating who is useful and who is not. From the very beginning, I could feel that Diane did not think much of me. I wasn't flashy enough. I didn't talk about stocks or investment portfolios or vacation homes. I was just a quiet, older man who wore the same type of button-down shirt every day, and who liked to sit on the back porch in the evenings and listen to the birds. In Diane's world, that made me irrelevant. But what hurt more, what I could never quite put into words, was that after Marcus married Diane, he started to change too. The Sunday dinners stopped. The phone calls got shorter. When they did visit, Marcus would sit at the table scrolling through his phone, while Diane talked to Sandra about things I had no interest in, and whenever I tried to contribute something to the conversation, there would be this pause, this tiny, polite pause, and then they would just continue talking as if I hadn't spoken. I felt myself becoming invisible in my own home. Sandra noticed none of this, or maybe she did and didn't care. By that point, she and Diane had formed a strange sort of alliance. They went shopping together. They had lunch together on weekends. They talked on the phone for hours. Meanwhile, I sat in my chair on the back porch and watched the birds. I thought, this is just what happens when families grow. People get busy. This is normal. I kept telling myself that, until the day I found the letter. It was a Tuesday morning. Sandra had already left for work. I was looking for my insurance documents in the filing cabinet in the study, and tucked behind a folder of old utility bills, I found an envelope. It wasn't sealed. The flap was just folded in. I should have put it back. A part of me knew I should have put it back. I didn't. Inside was a handwritten note. The handwriting was Sandra's, but it wasn't addressed to me. It started with the words, "Derek, I keep thinking about last Thursday." I read the whole thing. I folded it carefully and put it back exactly where I found it. Then I sat down in the chair by the window and looked out at the backyard for a very long time. I want you to understand something about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't rage. It wasn't the kind of hot, screaming pain that you see in movies where the man throws things across the room and punches walls. It was cold. It was deep. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff and looking down and realizing that the ground underneath you had been hollow for years, that you had been walking on nothing. I sat there for maybe 2 hours, and then I picked up the phone and called my oldest friend, a man named George, who had been my friend since we were 19 years old. "George," I said quietly, "I need to talk." "Harold." His voice changed immediately. "What happened?" "Not on the phone," I said. "Come by this afternoon." George came. I told him everything. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, with his big hands folded and his face very still, listening. When I finished, he said, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm not going to do anything stupid. I'm not going to give her the satisfaction of watching me fall apart." George nodded slowly. "You need to talk to someone," he said. "A lawyer." I looked at him. "Not yet. I need to understand everything first, the whole picture." What I didn't tell George, what I hadn't told anyone, was that finding that letter had triggered something in my memory. A small detail I had pushed aside months ago. A document I had seen on Sandra's desk when I brought her lunch one afternoon. A document with both her name and Derek Calloway's name on it. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Work documents, I assumed, but now everything was different. I started paying attention, quietly, carefully. The way my father always said, a quiet man sees more than anyone realizes. Over the next 6 weeks, I did something I had never done in 31 years of marriage. I paid attention, not in a suspicious, paranoid way. I wasn't following anyone or going through phones. I simply started watching, listening, connecting dots, and the picture that formed was not what I expected. It was worse. Through a conversation I overheard between Sandra and Diane, they were sitting in the living room. They thought I was asleep upstairs. I learned that Sandra and Derek Calloway had been involved for almost 18 months, not a brief indiscretion, a sustained, deliberate relationship, but that wasn't the most shocking part. The most shocking part was what Diane said next. She said, "And he's willing to move forward with the property." Sandra said, "He has the paperwork ready. Harold won't even notice until it's too late." I lay in my bed upstairs, completely still, and I listened. What I heard, in the next 10 minutes, turned my blood cold. Sandra and Derek Calloway had been planning to use a property transfer document, a document she had been slowly preparing, with forged elements to transfer the equity in our home, which I had paid off entirely through 30 years of labor, into a joint account that she and Derek controlled. She wasn't just having an affair. She was planning to take everything, and our son's wife, Diane, knew. She had known for months, and she had said nothing. I lay in my bed that night with my eyes open and the ceiling above me dark and quiet, and I made my decision. The next morning I came downstairs, made my coffee, and sat at the kitchen table as if nothing had happened. Sandra was getting ready for work. She moved around the kitchen without looking at me much. That had become normal. We had become people who shared a house the way strangers share a waiting room. "Good morning," I said. "Morning," she said without turning around. I watched her. This woman I had loved for 31 years. This woman I had worked for, sacrificed for, stayed faithful to through every difficult season of our lives. This woman who was now planning to strip me of everything I had built with my own hands. I felt a wave of something rise up in my chest. Not anger, something heavier, something that felt like the last of a very long grief. But I kept my face still. I picked up my coffee cup. I said, "Have a good day at work." She paused for just a fraction of a second. Then she said, "You too," and she left. I sat there in the quiet kitchen. Then I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. His name was Raymond Parks. He was 60 years old, careful, methodical, and thorough. I had used him twice before for business matters. He was the right man for this. "Raymond," I said when he picked up, "I need to come in today. It's urgent, and I need you to bring in someone who specializes in property fraud." There was a pause. "How soon can you be here?" "An hour," I said. "I'll be here," he said. I drove to Raymond's office in the morning quiet, and I laid out everything I knew. Every detail, every date, every conversation I had overheard. I had written it all down in a notebook over the past 6 weeks, careful and precise, the way I had been trained to manage operations, reports at work. Raymond listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Harold, you know what this means." "I know," I said. "This isn't just infidelity. If what you're describing is accurate, the property transfer, the forged documentation that crosses into criminal territory." "I know," I said again. "Do you want to pursue that?" I thought about it. I thought about Sandra at 26, with her dark hair. I thought about Marcus the day he was born. I thought about 31 years of cold mornings and long drives and silent dinners and never complaining. "I want to protect what's mine," I said quietly, "and I want the truth to come out, but I don't want to destroy anyone out of anger. I want to do this right. Raymond nodded. Then we do it right. We spent the next 3 hours building a plan. By the time I drove home, everything was in motion. Documents had been flagged. Bank accounts had been quietly reviewed. A specialist had been contacted. Sandra didn't know. Marcus didn't know. Diane didn't know. And I went home and I sat on my back porch and I listened to the birds and I waited. The day it finally broke open started like any other. I sent Sandra a message that morning about dinner. Simple, I'm making pasta tonight. Will you be home by 7? She read it. I could see the 2 blue check marks. She didn't reply. By noon I sent another message. Should I set a plate for you? Read, no reply. 3 o'clock. 4 o'clock. 6 o'clock. Nothing. I made my pasta anyway. I sat down at the kitchen table. I ate alone. I watched the clock. At 11:04 p.m. the front door opened. Sandra walked in, coat still on, lipstick smudged. A strange energy about her, like someone who had made a decision and felt good about it. She looked at me sitting there, and she smirked, and she said, "You know what happened today, Harold. I had a one-night stand with my boss, and honestly, I'd do it again." She stood in the doorway of the kitchen watching me. Waiting, I looked at her calmly. I picked up my fork, and I finished the last few bites of my pasta. I set the fork down. I folded my napkin. I stood up, picked up my plate, walked to the sink, rinsed it, and placed it in the rack to dry. "Good night, Sandra," I said quietly, and I walked upstairs. I heard her behind me in the kitchen, her breathing harder now, a frustrated sound escaping her throat. She had wanted a reaction. She had wanted tears, or screaming, or begging. She had wanted me to crumble. I didn't crumble, because I already knew. I already knew everything. The next morning, I was up at 6 o'clock. I showered, dressed, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open in front of me. At 7:15, I heard Sandra's footsteps on the stairs. She came into the kitchen in her robe, expecting to find the usual scene. Maybe expecting to find me broken, puffy-eyed, slumped over the table. Instead, she found me sitting straight, backed with my coffee, completely calm, reviewing notes. She stopped in the doorway. "Harold," she said. Her voice had a different quality now, uncertain, morning. I said pleasantly. She moved to the coffee maker, watching me sideways. "You're in a good mood." "I slept well," I said. She poured her coffee, sat down across from me. I could feel her studying my face, trying to read something in it. "About last night," she started. "Sandra," I said gently. "You don't need to explain anything." She blinked. "I don't know," I said, "because by this time tomorrow you'll have received some paperwork from Raymond Parks. You remember Raymond, my lawyer?" The color shifted in her face. "The paperwork," I continued quietly, "will outline the divorce proceedings. It will also outline a separate document that Raymond's colleague has already submitted to the county property office. A flag has been placed on all transactions related to this house, permanently, until the proceedings are complete." Sandra's coffee cup was halfway to her lips. It stopped. "Additionally," I said, and I want you to hear this clearly because I'm only going to say it once, the bank accounts, both of them, the joint account and the secondary account that you opened 14 months ago in your name, they've both been reviewed, and Raymond's colleague has forwarded the relevant documentation to the district attorney's office. Sandra set her coffee cup down very slowly. She looked like a woman watching the floor open up beneath her feet. "Harold," her voice cracked, "I'm not angry," I said. And I meant it. I was sad. For a long time I was just sad. But I'm not angry. Anger is for people who still have something to lose. You can't. She started. "How did you forgot?" I said simply, that a quiet man hears everything. The front door opened. Marcus walked in. He had a key. He visited sometimes on Saturday mornings. He stopped in the hallway when he saw us both at the table, something strange in the air between us. "Dad," he said. "Mom, what's going on?" "Good," I said calmly. "Sit down, Marcus. There are some things you should hear." Marcus sat down. He looked from me to his mother, and back again. Sandra was pale. Her hands around her coffee cup were still. I said, "Marcus, I want to tell you something, and I need you to just listen. Can you do that?" He nodded slowly. "I have spent 31 years loving your mother. I have spent 31 years working, sacrificing, staying faithful, and keeping this family together through things that would have broken other men. I never complained. I never asked for anything beyond basic respect. That is all I ever asked for, just to be seen to matter." Marcus was very still. "Over the past 18 months, your mother has been having an affair with her boss. That alone I might have found a way to grieve and move past. People make mistakes. Marriages go wrong. That is painful, but it is human." I looked at Sandra. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the table. "What I cannot forgive," I said, "is the plan, the property transfer, the forged documents, the attempt to take this house, which I built, Marcus, which I paid for with 30 years of my labor, and move it into an account that she and this man controlled. That was not a mistake. That was a decision made over many months, in secret." Marcus had gone very white. "Dad, and your wife knew," I said quietly. Silence. Marcus slowly turned to look at his mother. "Mom, is that true?" Sandra said nothing. "Mom," his voice broke. "Did you actually plan to? It wasn't like that." Sandra said finally, her voice thin and cracked. "It was complicated, Marcus. Your father and I haven't been happy for years. You wanted to take everything he built," Marcus said. "And leave him with nothing." She flinched, and Diane knew. Marcus whispered, "Marcus, answer me, Mom." Sandra looked at the table. And that was answer enough. Marcus stood up from the table. His chair scraped back loudly. He put both hands on the counter and stood there with his back to us, breathing. "Dad," he said without turning around. His voice was raw. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't. I should have seen what was happening. I should have been here. You couldn't have known." I said gently, "I should have been paying attention." He said, "I got so caught up in my own life, in Diane, in trying to impress people, and I stopped seeing you, Dad. I stopped seeing you." He turned around. His eyes were wet. "You've been sitting at this table alone," he said. "Haven't you? For how long?" I didn't answer. But I think my face answered for me. Marcus walked over and put his hand on my shoulder. He stood there for a moment, and I felt, for the first time in years, that my son was actually in the room with me. 2 hours later, Diane arrived. She didn't know what she was walking into. She came in with shopping bags, already talking before she was fully through the door. "Sandra, I found the most incredible shoes at—" She stopped. "The kitchen table. Marcus, me." Sandra sitting silent and pale. Diane's face changed quickly. Too quickly. Something practiced and calculated moved across her expression. "What's wrong?" she said. "What happened?" "Sit down, Diane," Marcus said. His voice was steady, controlled, a quality I recognized. He had his grandfather's voice in that moment. My father's voice. "Marcus, what's going on?" "Sit down." She sat. "Did you know," he asked, simple, direct, "about my mother and Derek Calloway, about the property plan? Did you know?" Diane looked at Sandra. "Don't look at her," Marcus said. "Look at me." Marcus, it's not as simple as, "Did you know?" A long pause. And then Diane did something I didn't expect. She lifted her chin and said, "Your father wasn't making your mother happy. Someone had to look out for her." The silence that followed was enormous. I watched Marcus very carefully in that moment. I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. I saw something move through his eyes, a kind of devastating clarity, the kind that comes when you finally see someone completely for the first time. So you helped plan to defraud my father, he said slowly, and you're sitting here justifying it. It wasn't my father. Marcus said, and his voice cracked on the word, has never in his life raised his hand or his voice to anyone in this family. He has never cheated, never lied, never taken a single thing for himself. That wasn't his. He built this house. He paid for my education. He never, not once, complained. He paused. And you sat at his dinner table and smiled at his face and helped plan to steal everything from him. Diane looked at me, and for the first time I saw something in her face that wasn't calculation. It was the beginning of something smaller. Quieter, shame, Harold, she said. My name from her mouth sounded strange. She had never called me by my first name before. You don't have to say anything to me, I said gently. What you have to say, you need to say to your husband. I stood up from the table. I looked at Sandra one last time. She was crying now, quiet, private tears running down her face, not the dramatic kind. The kind that come when something is truly over, and a person finally understands what they have done. Sandra, I said, I want you to know something. In spite of everything, I don't hate you. I never will. We had 31 years together. We made Marcus together. Those things are real and they matter, and I won't pretend they don't. She looked up at me. But I also won't let what you tried to do to me define how I spend the rest of my life. I said, I've been invisible in this house for a long time. I'm done with that. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair. Raymond's office will handle everything from here, I said. The house, the accounts, all of it. My things will be moved out by Thursday. Harold, Sandra started. Take care of yourself, I said, and I walked out. George had a spare room. He had offered it to me months ago, not knowing exactly what was coming, just knowing, the way old friends know, that I might need it. I moved into that room on Thursday. It wasn't much, a bed, a window, a small desk, but it was mine. And in the evenings, George and I would sit on his front porch and drink coffee and watch the street and not always say anything. Because after 40 years of friendship, you don't always need to. I slept better than I had in years. The legal proceedings moved forward. The property fraud case went to the district attorney. In the end, Sandra was not criminally charged. The documents had been prepared but not yet executed, and Raymond argued for leniency given the circumstances. But the civil proceedings were clear and decisive. The house, the accounts, everything built over 30 years of my labor, was protected. Sandra lost the case. She and Derek Calloway did not last. He was, apparently, not the kind of man who stays when things become difficult. He was only ever drawn to what was easy and glittering. When things became complicated, legal, expensive, messy, he disappeared. Sandra found herself alone. She called me once. 3 weeks after everything, I picked up. She didn't say much. She cried for a while. Then she said, I don't know when I stopped seeing you, Harold. I really don't, but I stopped, and I'm sorry. I know, I said. Was I always this cruel? She asked. No. I said honestly, you weren't always. People change. Life changes them. It's not entirely one thing or another. She was quiet. Harold, she said, you are the best man I have ever known. And I didn't realize it until I'd already burned everything down. I sat with that for a moment. Take care of yourself, Sandra, I said, and I meant it. I hung up. I sat by the window in George's spare room, and I watched the trees for a long time. Marcus called me every day after that, sometimes twice. It started awkwardly, the way things do when you're trying to rebuild something that has been neglected for too long. We didn't always know what to say. We talked about small things first, baseball, the weather, a book I was reading. But slowly, the real conversations started coming back. One Sunday, he came and picked me up, and we went to the diner we used to go to when he was a boy. He was 15 the last time we'd been there together. I could still picture him sitting across from me in that same booth, lanky and serious, asking me questions about life. We sat in the same booth now. He ordered the same thing He always ordered, as a kid, pancakes with extra syrup, and I ordered my coffee and eggs, and for a while we just sat there in that familiar quiet. "Dad," he said finally, "I failed you. Marcus." No, let me say it. I let myself get caught up in Diane's world and her values and her way of looking at things. And somewhere in there I stopped. I stopped being the son you raised. I stopped seeing what was right in front of me. "You were always a good son," I said. "I was a distracted one," he said. "There's a difference." He stirred his coffee. "You know what I remember most," he said quietly. "When I was maybe 9 or 10, I got into a fight at school. Some kid said something mean. I came home crying, and you sat me down, and you said, 'Marcus, being a man doesn't mean you don't feel things. It means you choose carefully what you do with those feelings.'" I remembered that afternoon. "I forgot that for a while," Marcus said. "I think I needed to remember it. We sat in that diner for 3 hours. When he dropped me back at George's, he got out of the car and he hugged me, long and tight, the way he used to when he was small. "I love you, Dad," he said. "I love you too, son," I said. "I always did." As for Diane, Marcus and Diane were in counseling. Whether they would make it through, I didn't know. That was their journey to walk. But Marcus told me that Diane had changed since everything came out. That she had said, and he believed she meant it, that she had confused ambition with wisdom, and that watching what happened to me had been the first time in her adult life that she felt genuine shame. I hoped it was true. People can change. I've always believed that. I've had to. Let me tell you something about silence. People misunderstand it. They think a quiet man is a weak man. They think because he doesn't shout, he doesn't feel. They think because he doesn't react, he doesn't see. That is the most dangerous misunderstanding a person can make. Silence, when it belongs to a man who truly understands it, is not emptiness. It is fullness. It is patience. It is the willingness to wait until the right moment instead of spending yourself in the wrong one. My father taught me that. I spent 31 years being quiet in my marriage, not because I was afraid, not because I was broken, but because I believed for a long time that love meant enduring, that devotion meant staying, that a man's worth was measured in how much he could absorb without falling apart. I was not entirely wrong, but I learned at 60, 2 years old, sitting alone at a kitchen table watching a clock on the wall, that there is a difference between patience and erasure. There is a difference between being steady and being invisible, and there is a difference between loving someone and losing yourself entirely for them. The night Sandra walked in and said what she said, I think part of her wanted to break me. Part of her needed to see me fall apart to feel that she still had power over something, to feel that I still mattered enough to be hurt. But I didn't fall apart, not because I didn't feel it, because I had already done my grieving, quietly, alone, over weeks and weeks on that back porch watching the birds. I had already sat with the pain and looked at it and let it move through me like weather. And on the other side of all that grief, I found something I hadn't felt in years, clarity, freedom, myself. I am writing this from the small house I am renting now on the north side of the city. It has a back porch, a garden that I am slowly learning to tend, a kitchen table that seats two, which is enough. George comes over on Thursdays. Marcus comes over on Sundays. Sometimes we're joined by George's brother and his wife, and we sit out in the garden and eat whatever I've cooked. I've been learning to cook better, actually, without someone telling me not to bother, and we talk and laugh, and sometimes just sit in comfortable quiet. I am 62 years old. I am not bitter. I know that might surprise you, but bitterness is a weight I choose not to carry. It would only slow me down, and I have places still to go. Do I miss what I thought I had? Of course. I miss the life I believed I was building. I miss the family I thought was solid. I miss the mornings that felt full of simple promise. but I don't miss being invisible. I don't miss sitting at a table where nobody saw me. I don't miss waking up in a house where I had stopped mattering. That man, the one who ate his cold pasta in silence while his wife smirked at him, that man deserved better. He had deserved better for a long time. And the kindest thing I ever did for him was finally agree. If you take nothing else from this story, take this. The people who love you quietly, who work without complaining, who stay when it would be easier to leave, who sit alone at kitchen tables and still say good night without raising their voice, those people are not weak. They are carrying more than you know, and they see more than you realize. Do not take a quiet person's patience for blindness. Do not take their endurance for weakness. Do not take their love for granted just because they don't demand that you see it. Because the day a quiet person finally decides they have had enough, they don't scream, they don't beg, they don't fall apart, they simply stand up, they rinse their plate, they say good night, and then they build something beautiful out of whatever is left. There is no revenge more powerful than a good life, and there is no lesson more painful than realizing, too late, that the person you underestimated was the best thing you ever had.